There's a silence that lives inside many of us, a silence that therapy couldn't touch, that self-help couldn't fix, that time never healed. We read the books, we spoke the truth, we traced the trauma back to its source. And yet, something still hurts, quietly, constantly, like a wound that refuses to close. We've been told that healing is a journey, a process, a set of steps. But what if that's the first lie? What if the very way we understand healing has been infected by a myth so deep, so subtle, that we mistake it for truth? The modern mind has been shaped by a dangerous promise that pain is a malfunction and peace is a product. That if we work hard enough, reflect deeply enough, and find the right method, we can erase our suffering. But what if suffering isn't a problem to solve? What if it's a signal we keep misreading? Carl Jung once warned that we spend far too much energy climbing the ladder of healing, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. He spoke of the shadow, the part of ourselves we deny, repress, and exile. And here's the tragedy. Most healing practices don't bring us closer to the shadow. They teach us to conquer it, to silence it, to make it disappear. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in the silence after the meditation. It waits beneath the affirmations. It waits behind the smile that says, "I'm fine now." And every time we try to eliminate it, we deepen the illusion that peace lies on the other side of pain, rather than within it. We chase healing as if it were a destination, a finish line, a promised land beyond the chaos of human emotion. But healing was never meant to be an escape. It was meant to be a confrontation. Michel Foucault once said that knowledge is not about truth. It's about power. The stories we tell about healing are not neutral. They come from systems that benefit when we believe we are broken, systems that define wellness, categorize disorder, and sell solutions. To pathologize is to control. And to convince a society that it is sick is to create a market for the cure. But this myth goes deeper than capitalism. It lives in the language of therapists, the rituals of wellness, the metrics of progress. It's the unspoken belief that to be whole means to be unscarred, that to be free means to be empty of pain. And so we sit in our quiet despair, wondering why nothing works. We follow the map but never arrive. We feel better for a while only to fall back into the ache. We blame ourselves. We assume we haven't done enough. But maybe the problem isn't our failure to heal. Maybe the problem is how we define healing. What if healing doesn't mean removing the wound, but learning how to live with it? Before anything can change, we must unlearn a lie so deeply rooted in our culture, our psychology, our identity, that we no longer see it for what it is. It's not a matter of finding a better method. It's a matter of seeing through the myth entirely, because until we question the myth of what it means to be healed, we will never be.
We will walk in circles, forever treating the symptoms of a sickness we never had, only a story we were taught to believe. And that is where our journey begins. The idea that we are broken, that our inner worlds are defective, fractured, or
diseased, is not a timeless truth. It's an invention. A story that became a system that became an identity. It wasn't always this way. In ancient cultures, suffering was not a pathology. It was a part of existence, woven into the fabric of myth, ritual, and communal meaning. The Greeks spoke of catharsis, of the purifying power of tragedy. In Eastern traditions, pain was often understood as a necessary phase in the journey toward enlightenment, not a dysfunction to be medicated. Even in early Christian mysticism, suffering was seen as a spiritual crucible, transformative, meaningful, even divine. But something changed. During the Enlightenment, the human mind was reimagined. Rationality became sacred. Logic replaced mystery. And in that shift, something essential was lost. Our tolerance for ambiguity, for contradiction, for the messiness of inner life. The self was no longer a mystery to be lived. It became a puzzle to be solved. The industrial age only deepened this transformation. As factories demanded obedient workers and systems demanded standardization, the individual was stripped of their communal and spiritual roles and redefined as a unit of productivity. To be efficient means to be well. To be emotional, lost, or divergent became a liability. Wholeness was replaced by performance. Then came Freud. For all his insights, Freud gave us a new lens, the subconscious as a battlefield. Repression, neurosis, dysfunction. These became the vocabulary of the inner world. Pain was no longer something to be endured or transcended. It was something to be fixed, an internal error to be corrected by an external expert, the doctor, the therapist, the analyst. This wasn't just a shift in psychology, it was a revolution in identity. The self became a clinical object, a case, a condition, and slowly, subtly, society absorbed this idea. If you are in pain, something is wrong with you. The medicalization of the mind accelerated. What was once grief became prolonged depression. What was once a crisis of meaning became generalized anxiety disorder. Emotions that were once natural were now framed as symptoms. Variations in human experience were pathologized, labeled, and treated. And so we began to relate to ourselves not as mysteries, but as malfunctions. This mindset didn't stop at psychiatry. It bled into advertising, media, and capitalism itself. Marketing experts discovered a simple truth. Insecure people buy more. If you can convince someone they're not enough, beautiful enough, confident enough, healed enough, you can sell them the solution: self-help, skincare, medication, a course, a coach, a cure. And so, the myth of the broken self became profitable. We learned to internalize inadequacy, to scan ourselves for defects, to ask endlessly, "What's wrong with me?" And the more we asked, the more answers the system provided. Diagnoses, labels, products, all promising to make us whole again. But wholeness was never the goal. Perpetual discontent is far more lucrative. We became consumers of healing, clients of self-worth. And yet, with every solution, we only felt more fragmented because the story never changed. The myth held steady: you are broken, and the answer lies outside of you. This is the foundation of the modern self, not just as a person, but as a project. A never-ending improvement campaign driven by the fear of not being enough. And every time we engage with it, every time we try to fix ourselves through the lens it provides, we reinforce the very lie that keeps us trapped. This is not just a psychological error. It is a cultural system. A system that survives by shaping our perception of ourselves. But what if the self was never broken? What if the pain we carry is not a sign of dysfunction, but a response to a world that has forgotten how to hold it? Before we can begin to understand healing, we must dismantle the scaffolding built around our suffering. We must see how the myth was constructed, by philosophy, by industry, by medicine, and by fear. Only then can we begin to ask the right questions. And perhaps the most radical question of all is this: what if we don't need to be fixed? From here, we descend deeper into the architecture of the myth and the silent machinery that keeps it alive. There is a promise buried deep within modern life, a silent vow whispered through therapy offices, meditation apps, self-help books, and glossy wellness retreats. It says, if you just do the work, you'll get there. If you heal the wounds, silence the inner critic, align your chakras, or restructure your beliefs, you'll arrive at wholeness. But where exactly is there? And who promised this version of you even exists? This is the myth of wholeness, the belief that somewhere, waiting at the end of your efforts, is a final, pure, healed self, complete, at peace, no longer fragmented or contradictory. It's a myth that has captured the modern imagination. And it is a trap. This fantasy rests on an assumption that there is a stable, unified self hidden beneath the noise. A true you, polished and wise, waiting to be uncovered. But when we trace this belief through time, we find that it is not universal. It's not even old. In Zen Buddhism, the self is an illusion. The ego is a fleeting construction, constantly assembling and disassembling. The pursuit of a fixed identity is itself the source of suffering. You are not a solid being. You are a process, a flickering flame, a wave that thinks it's separate from the ocean. Nietzsche, too, rejected the fantasy of inner unity. He saw the self not as a temple to be restored, but as a battlefield of competing drives and masks. He wrote of the multiplicity of man, the chaos of instincts that cannot be resolved, only danced with. For Nietzsche, becoming whole was not about peace, it was about learning to love the storm inside. And then there was Jung, who dared to offer a third path. He introduced the idea of individuation, not perfection, but integration. The journey for Jung was not to erase your shadow, but to meet it, to make peace with the parts of yourself that scare you, the liar, the addict, the manipulator, the wounded child, the voice you wish would go silent. Wholeness, in his view, was not the absence of chaos. It was the ability to carry it without flinching. So why, in today's world, do we cling so tightly to the opposite idea? Why do we still chase a version of ourselves that doesn't exist? Because we've been sold it. The myth of wholeness is not just spiritual, it's economic. It's the engine of a multi-billion-dollar industry that thrives on your discomfort. Inner peace, rebranded as a product. Harmony, packaged as a subscription. The enlightened self, turned into an aspirational lifestyle. The promise is always just out of reach. One more course, one more transformation, one more morning routine. And then, maybe then, you'll feel complete. But what if you never do? What if wholeness isn't a destination but a mirage? This realization is not comforting. It destabilizes. It fractures the ground we stand on. But it also frees us. Because maybe the point was never to be whole in the way we imagined. Maybe the real you is not a statue being sculpted, but a river in constant motion. Maybe healing isn't about cleaning up the mess, but learning to move through it with grace. This is a dangerous idea because it robs the system of its power. It says, you are not a product to be perfected. You are not broken machinery waiting for repair. You are a living contradiction, and that is your nature. And once you stop seeking the end, you begin to live in the middle. You begin to find peace, not in resolution, but in relationship, with your fear, with your longing, with your jagged edges that will never fully smooth out. The myth of wholeness collapses under its own weight when you look too closely. But in its ruins, you find something more honest, the beauty of incompleteness. And so the question shifts from how do I become whole to what if I already am, just not in the way I thought. This is the fracture we now step into willingly, not to fix it, but to understand it. Because in that chaos, something real begins. Something the myth could never offer. Not perfection, not peace, but freedom. In today's world, the pursuit of truth has become indistinguishable from the pursuit of aesthetics. Healing isn't just something you do, it's something you show, something you brand, something you sell. The raw ache of being human has been filtered, hashtagged, and monetized until it no longer resembles suffering at all. It looks, instead, like a curated Instagram post, a neatly packaged YouTube thumbnail, a smiling influencer in pastel yoga pants promising peace for the price of a monthly subscription. This is where the myth of wholeness metastasizes from a personal belief into a societal machinery. It doesn't just live inside individuals. It thrives across platforms. It is sold to the masses under the illusion of empowerment. The idea is seductive, that peace, clarity, and truth are accessible if you can afford them. But truth, once sacred, has been turned into content. We are no longer seekers of understanding. We are consumers of therapeutic narratives. The algorithms. Reward repetition, simplicity, certainty. Nuance dies in the scroll, and in its place, a spectacle emerges. Guy Debord called it exactly that. The society of the spectacle. A culture where appearance replaces reality, where what matters isn't whether something is true, but whether it feels like it is. And in this new theater, healing becomes performance. Therapy becomes a trend. Suffering becomes a genre. Michel Foucault warned us about this evolution. He saw how institutions, schools, hospitals, prisons didn't just enforce rules, they manufactured norms. They didn't ask what was true, they defined what could be spoken. Truth, he argued, is never neutral. It's constructed by power, managed, contained, sanitized. Today that construction is algorithmic. The new priests wear microphones. The new scriptures are TED Talks. The sacred texts are swipeable and optimized for engagement. But beneath the polished content lies a cruel irony. The more fragmented people feel, the more desperate they become for meaning. And the more desperate they become, the more vulnerable they are to those who claim to have the answer. The truth industry doesn't heal the wound. It feeds on it. It repackages your emptiness as motivation. It tells you to grind harder, journal longer, meditate better, all while subtly reinforcing the same message: you are not enough, yet. And here Hannah Arendt's insight cuts through with chilling clarity. She wrote of the banality of evil, not as monstrous acts, but as quiet compliance with a broken system. Evil, she argued, often wears a bureaucratic face. It functions not through rage, but routine. And in that sense, the self-help empire becomes not a solution, but a silent machine, churning endlessly, promising healing while ensuring you never quite arrive. This isn't to say that every teacher, therapist, or coach is complicit. Many are sincere, many want to help. But the system they operate within rewards the myth. It favors those who sell certainty, who edit their wounds into digestible wisdom, who transform their pain into profit. And the people who suffer the most, they are told it's their fault, that they haven't tried hard enough, that healing is still ahead if only they purchase the next tool, adopt the next belief, follow the next influencer. This is not true. It is its mimicry, a hall of mirrors where you chase reflections that never stand still. When truth became a product, healing became a performance, and suffering a market. But the worst part isn't that it fails to deliver. The worst part is that it convinces you that you're a failure, that the myth is still intact, that the problem is still you. And so the cycle continues, silently, profitably, invisibly, until someone dares to ask, what if the entire system is sick, not you, not your shadow, but the very idea that peace is something to be purchased? This is the fracture point, where the myth begins to fall apart and where something more honest can begin. There's a reason the finish line always moves, why peace always seems just out of reach, why no matter how much you meditate, journal, track your habits, or take your pills, the feeling of being not enough keeps creeping back in. It's not your fault. It's by design. This isn't about personal failure. It's about structural dependence. A system that thrives not when you heal, but when you're always almost healing. A system built to keep you slightly broken, slightly insecure, slightly off balance. Enough to function, but never enough to feel free. Let's begin with the culture of productivity. From the moment we're old enough to hold a pencil, we're taught that our worth is in our output. The grades we earn, the jobs we hold, the hustle we glorify. Productivity isn't just an expectation, it's a moral virtue. In a world that worships efficiency, Rest becomes laziness. Stillness becomes failure. And any sign of internal struggle is pathologized, not as a natural part of being human, but as a threat to your ability to perform. Biopolitics, as Michel Foucault called it, is the governance of life itself. It's not just about controlling what you do. It's about shaping who you are, making you internalize the rules so deeply that you surveil yourself, discipline yourself, fix yourself. You become your own jailer, measuring your worth in metrics and milestones. And when self-monitoring begins to break you down, when the internalized pressure starts to crack your sense of self, the solution appears. Manufactured, advertised, and sold. Enter the pharmaceutical empire. A trillion-dollar industry built not on healing, but on maintenance. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, stimulants, sleeping pills. For every emotional experience, there's a pill to flatten it. To mute the symptoms, not address the root. Because a person who is truly healed stops consuming. But someone perpetually managing their symptoms, that's a lifelong customer, and it doesn't stop with medicine. Tech platforms prey on your neuroses like vultures circling a wounded animal. Algorithms are not neutral. They are engineered to stimulate insecurity. Every scroll recalibrates your self-image. Every ad is tailored to a wound you didn't even know you had. The platform doesn't want you to feel whole. It wants you to feel almost whole. Close enough to keep engaging, but never satisfied enough to stop. Anxiety drives clicks. Depression drives engagement. Self-doubt is profitable. This is no conspiracy theory. It's capitalism doing exactly what it was built to do. Monetize attention, package identity, sell solutions to problems it quietly sustains. Because if you ever felt truly whole, truly grounded, you'd stop reaching for validation. You'd stop compulsively consuming. You'd step outside the machine, and that, for the system, is a threat. Even the wellness industry, painted in soft colors and soothing voices, plays its part. It sells you back your own humanity in pieces, tells you your chaos is fixable, your sadness is chemical, your discomfort is dysfunction. It offers healing as a product, not a process, a lifestyle, not a liberation. And still, the wound persists. Because the wound is profitable. If you woke up tomorrow with no shame, no fear, no need to perform, entire industries would collapse. Billions would be lost. The gears would halt. You are not broken. But you must believe you are, for the system to survive. It's a bitter truth, one that lands not just as knowledge, but as betrayal, because the very institutions that promised to help you, the schools, the therapists, the tech platforms, the pharmaceuticals, the gurus, many of them mean well, but they operate within a framework that demands your suffering, that counts on your continued dysfunction to keep the lights on. This is not healing. It's containment. You are being managed, not liberated, stabilized, not restored. And every moment you feel like the problem, the machine keeps humming. The system doesn't need you whole. It makes you sick. Not catastrophically ill, just slightly unwell. Just unsure enough to keep buying, clicking, searching. And when you finally see this clearly, a new emotion begins to emerge. Not shame, not despair, but rage. Righteous, necessary rage. The kind that doesn't seek another cure, but burns the myth to the ground. Because you were never the problem. You were the product. We've been told that healing is a finish line. That if we work hard enough, read the right books, practice the right habits, and silence the right thoughts, we'll finally arrive, whole, balanced, untouched by chaos. But what if that version of healing doesn't exist? What if the wound isn't meant to disappear, but to be carried? For centuries, human beings lived in relationship with their suffering, not in constant war with it. Ancient philosophies, from the Stoics to the early Buddhists, understood that life was inseparable from pain. Epictetus didn't teach escape. He taught endurance. Marcus Aurelius didn't seek tranquility by controlling his environment. He found it by surrendering control altogether. Pain, they believed, was not an obstacle to virtue, but the soil in which it grows. Modern therapy, when it dares to go deep enough, reaches similar terrain. Existential therapists don't promise happiness. They promise honesty. They understand that anxiety, despair, and even guilt aren't signs of disorder. They're signs you're awake. Awake to the fragility of life, the weight of freedom, the burden of responsibility. They see healing not as soothing every discomfort, but learning to sit with discomfort without collapsing. Jung knew this too. He called it individuation, not perfection, but integration. He believed that true healing wasn't becoming someone new. It was becoming more fully yourself, including the parts you wish weren't there, the shadow, the rage, the envy, the fear. Jung didn't say destroy it. He said bring it into the light. Talk to it. Dance with it. Let it reshape you, because your pain holds truth. It reveals what matters. It tells you where you've been wounded and where you still long to be seen. But in the noise of the modern world, we're taught to drown that truth out, to medicate it, to optimize it, to mute the symptoms instead of listening to their message. Healing becomes a project, a performance, another form of self-improvement. But the more we chase resolution, the more we miss the point. Healing is not a resolution. Healing is a relationship. It's learning to coexist with the parts of you that hurt. Not because you failed to fix them, but because they're part of your story. Part of what makes you real. Healing isn't about never feeling anxious again. It's about not abandoning yourself when you do. It's about sitting with fear and saying, I'm still here. Real healing is quiet. It doesn't always look impressive. It doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it's choosing not to respond to an old trigger. Sometimes it's getting out of bed on a day your thoughts are loud. Sometimes it's crying without shame or laughing without guilt. It's 1,000 small acts of self-respect that the world will never reward, but your soul will recognize. It's not linear. It's not clean. There will be regressions, setbacks, days when the darkness returns. But healing doesn't mean the darkness goes away. It means you stop fearing it. You stop believing it owns you, and eventually, something strange happens. You stop asking when you'll be fixed. You start asking how to live better with what you carry. That's when healing begins. Not when the pain disappears, but when you stop turning it into an enemy. When you stop trying to silence the parts of you that ache, and instead learn how to listen, to hold them, to let them soften you, deepen you, shape you, not into a perfect person, but into a human one. There is a lie we carry so deeply. It shapes every thought we have about ourselves, every hope we pin on the future, every attempt we make to change. It whispers that healing means becoming someone else, someone whole, someone fixed, someone beyond the fractured, messy person staring back in the mirror. This lie tells us that the wound is a failure, a sign that we are broken beyond repair, that we must erase our pain to find peace. But what if that lie is the very thing that keeps us trapped? What if healing has nothing to do with becoming other than who you are? What if the relentless pursuit of perfection, the exhausting chase to fix ourselves, is what keeps the wound alive, raw, and unhealed? We spend lifetimes running from our shadows, fearing the parts of ourselves that feel dark, chaotic, or unlovable. We try to paint over the cracks, polish the rough edges, and smooth the jagged contours. Yet, in doing so, we lose something vital, something essential. We lose the truth that our wounds are not prisons, but portals, not signs of failure, but gateways to authenticity. Imagine for a moment that the very thing we have been told to erase is what defines our humanity. The vulnerability, the pain, the contradictions, they are the pulse of life itself. They are the textures and colors that give our existence depth and meaning. To deny them is to deny the richness of being alive. This is the paradox. Perfection is a myth. Wholeness is an illusion. The real journey is not toward some unreachable ideal, but deeper into the raw, unfiltered experience of being. To sit with your wound, not as a burden, but as a teacher. To embrace your fragmented self, not as broken, but as whole in its imperfection.